The noise was ended now. The smoke drifted like thin gray wisps of fog above the tortured earth and the shattered fences and the peach trees that had been whittled into toothpicks by the cannon fire. For a moment silence, if not peace, fell upon those few square miles of ground where just a while before men had screamed and torn at one another in the frenzy of old hate and had contended in an ancient striving and then had fallen apart, exhausted. For endless time, it seemed, there had been belching thunder rolling from horizon to horizon, and the gouted earth that had spouted in the sky, and the screams of horses and the hoarse bellowing of men, whistling of metal and the thud when the whistle ended, the flash of searing fire and the brightness of the steel, the bravery of the collars snapping in the battle wind. Then it had all ended and there was silence. But silence was an alien note that held no right upon this field or day, and it was broken by the whimper and the pain, the cry for water, the prayer for death, the crying and the calling and the whimpering that would go on for hours beneath the summer sun. Later the huddled shapes would grow quiet and still, and there would be an odor that would sicken all who passed, and the graves would be shallow graves. There was wheat that would never be harvested, trees that would not bloom when spring came round again, and on the slope of land that ran up to the ridge, the words unspoken and the deeds undone, and the sodden bundles that cried aloud the emptiness and the waste of death. There were proud names that were prouder now, but no more names than names to echo down through the ages. The Iron Brigade, the 5th New Hampshire, the 1st Minnesota, the 2nd Massachusetts, the 16th Maine. And there was Enoch Wallace. He still held the shattered musket, and there were blisters on his hands. His face was smudged with powder. His shoes were caked in dust and blood. He was still alive. And that begins Way Station by Clifford D. Simak. It is a Hugo Award-winning novel, which, after reading it, it definitely should be because it's excellent. I had always, Way Station had always been on my radar, but I had never gotten around to reading it. And a while back, I don't even remember when, I got a little book haul of Clifford D. Simak books because this was in it, and I had never read any of them. And I'm really sorry now that I hadn't because I really enjoyed Way Station a lot. Let me tell you what it says it's about. Neighbors saw Enoch Wallace as an ageless hermit striding across untended farm as he had done for over a century, still carrying the gun with which he had served in the Civil War. They must never know that inside his unchanging house he met and conversed with a host of unimaginable friends from the farthest stars. More than 100 years before, an alien being named Ulysses had recruited Enoch as the keeper of the Earth's only galactic transfer station. Now he studied the progress of Earth as he tended the tanks where the aliens appeared, and the charts he made indicated that his world was doomed to destruction. His alien friends could only offer help that seemed worse than the dreaded disaster. Then he discovered the horror that lay across the galaxy. Kind of sums up the beginning of the story to this. Enoch Wallace was a Civil War veteran who gets caught up with an alien, and he ends up living seemingly without aging for over 100 years from when he was. This takes place in the early 1960s, which is when it was written. So he'd been alive for like 130 years or something, and he looked like a 30-year-old. And people didn't know why that was, but he lived in a remote section of Iowa where people just don't question things like that. There were some other strange things that went around in there in that area, and people just didn't question it. It's like you mind your own business, and you won't get in trouble with anything. Kind of a small town mentality. And this was way out in the boondocks in Iowa. So he had been living at this place that had become a way station, which is where travelers from across the galaxy would come through in a really neat and interesting way. And he was the facilitator at the Earth's way station, and he was the only one that knew about it, and the only one that had any knowledge at all of aliens and their comings and goings. He became a trusted friend of Ulysses. His name wasn't really Ulysses, it was the one that Enoch gave him because the people, the aliens from his race didn't really have names, but he wanted him to have a name so he had something to call him, and the alien took a liking to Ulysses after he called him that, so he always went by that from then on. There's a lot going on in this book. It's a lot about humans' place in the larger galaxy. Do they deserve a place in the larger galaxy? What kinds of things does Earth need to overcome first before they can become part of that galactic community? There's the threat of nuclear war. Remember, this is the early 60s. And they just think that the world could be destroyed at any time. One of the things that I found interesting, it said, he recalled an article that he had read on one of the daily papers just a day or two before, in which a scientist had contended that no great intelligence ever could develop on a liquid world. But that scientist was wrong, for the Thuban race had so developed, and there were other liquid worlds where members of the galactic co-fraternity. There were a lot of things, he told himself, that man would have to unlearn, as well as things to learn, if he ever should become aware of the galactic culture. Very true. Things that humans are going to have to unlearn, and things that they need to learn. Saying something is uninhabitable by a living being because it's not habitable to human is very short-sighted. Just because a human couldn't live there doesn't mean some other creature couldn't live there. That's something I've always attested to, just in the sense of the galactic universe. Yes, I believe there are other alien creatures out there, and they're probably nothing like us. I, in some ways, hope they would be nothing like us, because we can't seem to get along. But that's the kind of things that this book asks, the kind of questions that it asks about what do humans have to do to be ready to be part of the galactic community. Also, he at one point asked Ulysses about what could be a cure for making sure there was no war on Earth. Stupidity, Ulysses said. Enoch gasped. Stupidity? I don't understand. We are stupid enough in many ways right now. You're thinking of intellectual stupidity, and there is plenty of that, not only on Earth, but throughout the galaxy. What I'm talking about is a mental incapacity, an inability to understand the science and technology that makes possible the kind of war that Earth would fight. So that's another thing going on. There's a lot of stupidity out there, both on Earth and in the galaxy, and it's something that the galaxy was a little closer to overcoming than what the Earth was, but he also made a distinction between just being stupid as as being not very smart, but being stupid as in not understanding the things that can hurt you, so you don't do those things. Um, but it would essentially throw back humans into Stone Ages again. And would it be worth it to avoid a nuclear war? Uh, I don't want to give away too much more than that, but I will say that Way Station was an excellent, excellent book. One of the best I've read so far this year. Uh, Maybe the best so far. I really, really enjoyed this book. Definitely earned the Hugo Award it won. This is definitely a science fiction classic. If you read science fiction at all, you should read this book. I don't think you can go through science fiction, and I mean, it's as long as I've been at it, and I just now finally read this, and also Clifford D. Simak. I'm going to break out those other books that I've got of his and get to them, because he's an excellent author. He has really lyrical prose, as you may have noticed from the opening that I read. That was the opening page and a half chapter. But very lyrical prose, very easy to read, very entertaining from beginning to end. Just an excellent, excellent book. I can't highly recommend this enough. Way Station by Clifford D. Simak. That's this week's Sci-Fi July selection. And thank you for hanging out with me. And I hope to see you next week. But definitely, definitely give Way Station a read.